So before I hand over to Raffaele, I just want to say a few words about Pompeii and the fact that the way the eruption was experienced in Pompeii led to a kind of preservation that we don't get anywhere except in Pompeii and the area around Pompeii. And that is that we have the preservation of organic remains in the form of the remains. We have some actual organic remains surviving, but the forms in particular survive. So very quickly, what we're looking at in this image here is Mt Vesuvius, of course, in the distance. The bit with the snow on it on the left, that is the modern volcanic cone, because volcanoes, of course, change shape all the time. They explode, they grow, they explode again. On the right, the second peak is Monte Sommo. It's part of the walls of the crater of the AD 79 eruption. So what happened was we get a series of explosions when Mount Vesuvius erupted in AD 79, and these result in a huge eruption column capped by a cloud. And the ash was falling in, and it fell in particular where the wind blew it, which on that day was southeast, and the majority of the fall, so we're looking at a map of the Bay of Naples, and these dotted lines are isopachs, and they tell you the depth of ash, and the greatest depth of ash is around Pompeii. You get something in the order of 2.5 to 2.8 meters of ash and pumice in the first phase of the eruption. Now, this eruption column was huge. It punched into the stratosphere at its peak at a height estimated to be somewhere between 27 and 32 kilometers. So when the explosion stopped, it couldn't support itself, so it started to collapse. And this is when you get the super deadly phase of the eruption. You get a series of hot gas avalanches called pyroclastic density currents. They come in two forms: pyroclastic flows and pyroclastic surges. And we can actually see, we can see in the stratigraphy, which Raffaele is going to show you in more detail later on. But basically, I've got a 2-meter ranging pole here. And what you can see is the first phase of the eruption. So about 2.5 to 2.8 meters of ash and pumice falling down. The first pyroclastic surge killed everyone who hadn't managed to escape at Herculaneum but didn't reach Pompeii. The second surge didn't reach Pompeii. The third surge followed almost immediately by the third surge reached the walls of Pompeii, didn't enter. The fourth surge followed almost immediately by the fifth surge, was the super deadly. Well, there were the super deadly ones, and we can see them in this very thin layer of ash. Then we get pyroclastic flows, another surge, and later material. And it's in that fourth and fifth surge layer that we get in the ash the forms of anything organic, particularly surviving. So the ash is the same chemical composition as cement. It hardens around anything organic. Over time, the soft tissue decomposes, percolates down through the nice porous layer of ash and pumice below, leaving a void. And when they started excavating in the 18th century, they started seeing voids. They weren't quite sure what to do with them. They recognized some as the negative forms of humans, and they were sure of it because the skeletons were inside, and they weren't sure what to do. In the early 19th century, they poured in plaster of Paris, and they managed to successfully cast wooden elements, furniture, trees, etc., but not human victims until 1863. And since 1863, 106 victims have been cast, mostly humans. And you can see these victims were cast in 1991. And you can actually see where the skin's thin, the bones poking out at the skull. And as well as the mostly human victims, we have 3 non-human mammals cast so far. One was a dog, another a pig, found at a working farm not far from Pompeii, and very recently in 2018, a horse. Okay, so how were these victims cast? Now, this is something we thought we knew. What we'd been told is the victims died. They were covered with that fine ash, their bodies decomposed. And when they were digging, as they got very close to the victims, they could actually feel that there was a hollow underneath. It's like tapping on the skin of a drum. So you could feel it, you could hear it. They'd sound a klaxon, the excavations would stop, they'd introduce 2 holes, one for pouring in plaster of Paris, another for as an air vent to let air out so that they could pour plaster into the extremities. They'd leave the plaster for 3 or so days till it dried, and then they'd chip the ash away and you'd be left with the form of the victim as they were when they died. And that's what we believed absolutely until 2015. Now, as well as humans, like I said, there's been other organic remains have been cast. So this is a door from the Villa of the Mysteries. This is a slatted door that would have been used for a shop front. We've got a wheel that would have had a wooden wheel with a metal iron rim, and a cupboard. So we get a huge collection of organic remains, and not just furniture, we also get plant remains. And in particular, there was a scholar from the 1960s onwards, Wilhelmina Yashemsky, who cast the roots of trees and other plants to establish what was grown in gardens across the site. And they were able to cast very large tree roots, for example, and identify them to species. And the policy's been to try and plant the same species nearby the ones that were originally planted. So here we have a garden, and that was one of the amazing finds of Yashemsky, that we do get gardens in the southern end of the site, and the little white discs are all the tops of roots, and these are grapevines, and experimental plantings have been done across the site. Raphael is going to talk more about that later. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to enter the site very, very soon, and we're going to go, first of all, through the entrance into the Street of the Tombs near the Porta Nocera. We'll come back, and then we're going to go and visit the large gymnasium or Palestra, the Amphitheater. Then we're going to go and visit the Quartio of Julia Felix, the so-called House of Octavius Quartio, and then we're going to go down to the Garden of the Fugitives, and then up onto the walls to see the view of the site from the south. At this point, I'll stop and hand you back to my colleague, Raffaello. Thank you.
Thank you, Estelle. Thank you very much. And it's the video. Alessandra, she's running the video on now. Oh, 1 second. Stuart, can you turn our video on, please? Because we are without a video. Okay, yes. Welcome to Pompeii. Good morning, good afternoon, actually, and thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I am Raffaele Romano, and behind the camera we have Alessandra, and ready to explore the archaeological site of Pompeii. Even if it's summer today, the sky is not so clear, but it's perfect because we won't have problem with the heating phone. And as Estelle said, we are going to start our tour of Pompeii from the city walls. Usually in the Roman time, as happened also for other cultures before Romans, people used to have the necropoli, the tombs, the cemeteries outside the city walls. And where we are walking now is the necropoli of Porta Nocera. The city of Pompeii is extended for 124 acres. It's a huge archaeological site and is one of the most well-preserved Roman cities in all over the world. Like Herculaneum, Pompeii is even bigger, is larger, and we have the scale of the city. What we can see here actually is the normal day life and death, as we say. And at the edge of the city walls, where Pompeii had 7 different gates, one of the richest necropoli, one of the greatest area for the tombs is where we are walking now. It's the necropoli of Porta Nocera, where we can show you actually the real pyroclastic flow in the different layers. Behind this grid, you will get the first products of the volcanic eruption, which is the Pompeii stones, a very light, small stone with a lot of bubble that you can put one of them on the water, they can float. But imagine 1 cubic meter of Pompeii stones together on top of the roofs. It's like the weight of 6 people. That's why in Pompeii, we don't have anymore so many upper floors, or we don't have anymore the original ceilings and roofs. And then after these Pompeii that was closing literally all the entrances of the houses, so most of people died inside their homes, waiting the end of this natural event that for them, they never realized how strong could be. Then we have, as I still said and show you before in the slides, the different other layers horizontal that you can see that it's representing the different steps of the eruption. So this is one of the most important wall where we have preserved the front of an excavation that you can really see the different color that sees all the ash. And it's at that level that you can have also some of the cast, or also above this part over there. And when the excavation started in the 1748, in the time when Naples was under the King Charles, the Bourbon family, it was a great news for all over the world. Imagine how many people could come here for the famous Grand Tour. Artists like Mozart came to visit Pompeii, or Goethe in his famous travel to the south. And one of the most typical things that they could see when they were coming, especially painters, they were representing the tombs, especially the beautiful tombs that we have around here. Most of them for rich aristocracy families that we can still read their name above the entrance. They were tombs where the symbol was a house. So they were building a house for the afterlife while the body was burned at the 1st century AD, and the ash put in the urns, and the urns inside the small niches that Alessandra is showing us also from the other tombs to the right corner. So Romans used to split the human life with the afterlife just nearby the entrance. And from far, we are able also to see the great city walls of Pompeii built in the time of the 5th century before Christ. So it's not really correct to say that Pompeii is just a Roman place. Pompeii is a mix of different cultures that from the 7th century before Christ, they were around this region. First of all, we had the local communities called Oscans. That's why the word Pompeii, coming from their local language, Pompe, that means number 5, supposed to be the union of 5 small villages on top of a hill, not so far from the coast. Today, the sea is about 2 miles away from where we are, but before the eruption was nearby the city walls, and there was a perfect place. It's a volcanic soil, and the river Sarno, an important river that could help to sell products to all the different towns along the valley called the Valle del Sarno. So from the 7th century, and then with the help of Greeks and the Etruscans, Pompeii started to be an important village. Porto Fluviale was called, a river port. And then in the 5th until the 3rd century after Christ, before Christ, Pompeii was under the control of the Samnites. After the Samnites, Romans arrived here and they found a very well-prepared city, a very important place. Romans started to call the region Campania, where we are, Campania Felix. That means wealthy, rich place. And from the 80s, after the Civil War, with the General Sylla, Pompeii started to be a Roman colony. In the area where we are, where we have great and important noble family tombs, we have something so special right in the middle that I will show you soon. That was an important info that helped the first excavators, the first people that they were digging around here, that the place that they were finding was Pompeii and not Stabia, as they thought in the in the first half of the 18th century. Also, as Stuart said, I'm still involved in the excavations of Pompeii, and just last March, a few months ago, digging just behind the ancient city, well, the archaeological site, in the corner where Alessandra is pointing now, I found the entrance just below the modern road, the entrance of a Roman villa. So this is something that it was literally an incredible discovery, because we don't know so much of how was the city of Pompeii outside the walls. But with this new discovery, and I'm going to dig again at the end of the summer, we will understand much more about the area outside the walls. It's supposed to be, as a preview, I'm going to tell you the entrance of a Roman villa. I'm just at the top, as you can see in the picture, I am just above the ceiling of this villa. I need to go down for about 4 meters to reach the step level of that villa. And this new discovery that, as you can see in the picture, is found just outside the entrance of Porta Nocera that you can see now in the video live. That was one of the main entrances to the city of Pompeii. Nocera, it was an important Roman town that was in contrast all the time with the city of Pompeii. So much important that in the Estelle later I will tell you something more about it. There was an important fight in the Amphitheater of Pompeii. But this is the stone that actually helped the first workers. They understood that the place that they were digging was the city, as you can see, Republica Pompeianorum, the city of Pompeii. And then in the 1748, the excavation started, and from that day until today, we still have 1/4 of Pompeii waiting for us. And along these tombs road, we have one of the greatest tombs called Eumachia, one of the most important family and lady that invested a lot of private money in public buildings. This is the famous, actually, tomb of Eumachia.
Oh, we've just lost your image, Raffaele.
Yes, Estelle, over to you.
Oh, okay. Oh no, you're back again.
Yes, yes. Please, over to you. I'm going back to the Palestra. So if you want to share something, we are here.
Okay, just give me a second.
Please.
Okay.
In the meantime, I'm reaching the entrance of the Palestra for our audience so we can see something special inside there.
Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit just near where Raffaele is, some of the casts that we're going to look at this evening. So we've particularly chosen this area of the site because it's where a number of casts were found, and nearly all of them were found by Amedeo Maiuri. He was the director of the site from 1924 right up until the end of 1961. And he was responsible for about 25 of the casts of, so nearly 1/4 of the casts of human victims that have been made to date come from his time. He's a little controversial because he was installed as Mussolini's archaeologist. Here he is taking Mussolini on a tour of Pompeii. And he was actually put under trial after the war, acquitted, and continued his very long tenure right to the end of 1961. Now, he saw Pompeii and Herculaneum, because he was responsible for all the sites in the region, he saw them as open-air museums, and he tried, especially towards the end of his tenure, to keep things in situ as much as possible. So this is one of the casts that was found. There were 4 casts found near the Porta Nocera and left very close to where they were found. This one at its original height, and we think at its original find spot. And this is us doing X-rays with portable digital X-ray machines. So my colleagues working inside, and we're seeing the results immediately as they come up on the outside. I'll talk more about how we do our work a little bit later. But what's interesting is that Maiuri was fascinated by magic. He wrote very emotional accounts about the casts, and he told stories about them. So, for example, the one that we're about to see, so I just wanted to show you some of the X-rays that we have. You can see there's arm bones, that's an upper arm and the 2 bones of the forearm. So they're the X-rays we've been getting. And some of the stories he told are quite amazing. So this one is a cast of an individual, and he said it was a beggar with a beggar's bag, and on the foot, I don't know if you can see it, but there's the remains of you can see the form of a very fine sandal with the straps, and he suggested that it was a beggar that was begging, but was given these fine sandals by a philanthropist. And that's really interesting because it's exactly the same story that was told for the 16th cast that was cast in 1890. Beggar with a beggar's bag and the impression of a very fine sandal. So quite astonishing that the same stories get recycled. Raphael is just walking across the bridge to the site, and actually on the right where he's walking, you can see he's just showing just outside the walls. In 2015, we actually installed a CT scanner, a hospital 16-slice CT scanner. Felix provided it for us so that we could do the first ever CT scans of the casts on the site. But more about that very, very soon. So what we're going to do now is Raphael is walking towards the Palestra, the gymnasium, and I'm just showing you an image of it from above. And he's going to stop just at the southern end of the Palestra. So on my cursor here, there's an ancient latrine. And in the 1930s, Amedeo Maiuri was digging here, and he found a number of skeletons inside the latrine, the covered latrine, and one outside that he cast. And he suggested that these were workers who were working on restoring the Palestra after the big earthquake. They had a huge earthquake in AD 62 that did a lot of damage. And he suggested that when the eruption started, they all raced to the latrine and bolted the door. And one person was left who didn't make it, and that they beat on the door and they never were let in. And so he wrote, and these are his words, that this person curled himself up into his blanket like a caterpillar in its cocoon and resigned himself to death. He decided it was a male. So we were able to do CT scans on this individual before we took this person out of the site. The restorers recorded it to ensure that no damage happened to this cast before it went. It was taken, in fact, to the local hospital. So this was done in 2017 when the local hospital let us use their much more impressive CT scanner, and taken out of the truck onto a trolley and CT scanned. And this person, I have to say, it's very misleading how they look like here, because in 1947, after World War II, a restorer added plaster to the base. It was actually found in this position, and plaster was added to the base to put it in a seated position so it was easier to display to the public. The bones inside. And further from that, we can isolate them so that we can identify this individual, and we can say with a high degree of certainty we are looking at male and adult male individuals. So this is the kind of work that we're doing to date. And I'm going to give you back to Raphael now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Raphael. Thank you, Estelle. Thank you. And I would like to say something to our guests that during the COVID time and after the pandemic, we have a lot of COVID restrictions. Some of the areas are closed. Some of Pompeii is not unlimited open, so we have to follow some particular routes. And now we are going to visit inside the famous Palestra. The Palestra was built in the time of the Emperor Augustus, and then this was something and a place where people were training people, and was an area of culture, physical exercises, and a meeting place. Let's go inside, because we have the great area, the courtyard, and some of the remains, some of the food remains stored behind the glass. Of course, most of the Palestra has been restored at the time of the director Maiuri, but we can still have the original pillars made of bricks and with a plaster around. This kind of pillar that you can see, round shaped bricks, we can literally say is from the time of the Emperor Nero. That means that the Palestra was all the time upgrade and upgrade. And behind these clothes, we can have the beautiful courtyard where we have the plaster cast of the ancient floor with the roots of some plants. And in the middle, there was a huge pool with a cross shape used for sports and water games. And inside these porticos, the porticades around the Palestra, we have behind this glass something special. Carbonized piece of wood, like olives, like chickpeas or peas, barley, millet, pine cone, garlic, something that is helping us to understand the Roman diet and especially the time of the eruption. Until the few years ago, we knew, following Pliny's the Younger letters, that the eruption was at the end of August, 24th of August. But when we found the new wine in the amphoras, or when we find, for example, the olive oil in some pots, actually we can say that the eruption was not in August, but at the end of fall. A few years ago, we found a graffiti on a wall that definitely changed the date of the eruption from August to October, and also a coin made in bronze in October in Rome, and not possible to have an eruption here at the end of the summertime. So as you can see, archaeology, it's not looking for treasures sometimes, but looking for info, as the stunning carbonized bread that you can see here from Pompeii, while the 3 pieces of bread above over there are from the city of Herculaneum, the other Roman town, buried with the same eruption of 79 AD. And then in this corner, we have also some other artifacts found, like the soles of cork sandals, or some plates with nuts inside, coming from another stunning archaeological site called Moregine, discovered in the 90s, and was the place where the ancient port of Pompeii was placed. So Pompeii literally is a treasure for understanding how the Roman life was working. And now, behind the Palestra, just in front of the entrance, this is one of the largest public buildings of the city of Pompeii. We have the entrance of the great amphitheater, the Amphitheater of Pompeii, where actually it was the first amphitheater made of stone of all the Roman history. Before the amphitheater, they were made of stone, like this one here in Pompeii, and built in the 75 before Christ by Cuspio Pansa, father and son. The amphitheater where gladiators were fighting, they were made of wood. So usually made of wood, they could be easy to break, to destroy them, especially because of fires. And after the rebellion of Spartacus from the famous city of Capua, Romans started to build the amphitheater nearby the city walls. We just crossed before the bridge where Estelle did a scan, and we have the entrance of the great Amphitheater of Pompeii. You can see in all of the beauty, this building has been restored a lot outside, but is still in the original shape. It was actually a building used for performances, as they said, as they call spectacular. Amphitheater actually is a modern word reused in the 18th century, but Romans called this building spectacular, so performances. And now I would like to go with you inside. I'm sorry if just for the first path we won't have a strong signal, because as you can imagine, the walls are very, very thick, so very strong. And so you will lose me just for a few seconds, but Estelle will show you beautiful things. And one thing that I want to tell you, that underneath the arches, the archaeologists found a lot of cooking ware. That means that during these gladiators fights, there were people preparing food and drinks, like in a modern stadium, like in a modern arena. And let's walk to the roads where gladiators could come inside, fighting with roughly 20,000 people around themselves.
Right, so while Raffaele walks down into the gladiator arena, I just wanted to say a little bit about what we think, or what has been thought about the size of the population of Pompeii in AD 79. Unfortunately, we don't have any census information, but Cassius, 150 or so years after the eruption, wrote that everyone was in the amphitheater watching games when Mt Vesuvius erupted. So when they found the amphitheater, they thought if they could work out how many bottoms could fit on the seats, they'd know how many people were living in Pompeii. So the first calculation was based on a bottom width of about 40 centimetres per person, and they calculated 20,000 people. That's very narrow. Giuseppe Fiorelli in the 1860s recalculated with 55 centimetres per person, a bottom width of 55 centimetres is way too big, but he calculated 12,807 people could have fitted into the amphitheatre. We know that's not really important because we know there's one event that happened in AD 59 where the people of Pompeii and the nearby town of Nocera were busy barracking for their different people on the arena, where something like the ancient equivalent of a modern football riot broke out, and more blood was spilled in the stalls than in the arena, and the Roman Senate banned games for 10 years. And this is a contemporary painting from Pompeii with the riot in the amphitheatre. There's the Palestra we've just visited with its pool. And here's the amphitheatre as the shops, as Raffaele was saying, outside. And so we don't know exactly how many people were living in Pompeii, and we really don't have any clear evidence, but we think somewhere between 8,000 and 15,000 individuals. So we've just reached the outside of the Praetor of Julia Felix. So just while we're waiting for Raffaele. So I'll hand it back to you, Raffaele.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, but you know, on a live on site, especially to an archaeological site, they can help that the signal and you know, it's happening. So basically, we are at the entrance of this important, one of the largest house of Pompeii, placed nearby the amphitheater. Unfortunately, we don't have any more the original frescoes placed outside the city walls, but we know that after the earthquake of 62, the famous Julia Felix, she turned to receive much money for the restoration of her huge accommodation. She turned the entire house to a kind of hotel, and with a private spa inside. The beautiful frescoes with the graffiti are telling about it and the price list that she was charging, especially for people that they were coming here visiting the amphitheater of Pompeii. We can say that the Predia literally means the beautiful garden of Julia Felix. They were divided in 4 different areas. We have the real house. We have the area used as a hotel, this big garden with the fruit trees, and the bathhouse. This house is so important because it has got 2 entrances. One is from the back in front of the amphitheater, and one is to the main street called the Via dell'Abbondanza. As Estelle before was talking about the plaster cast of the ancient trees, we can have here in this corner a real plaster cast of an ancient pomegranate. So with the technique of the cast, we know actually what type of roots and what kind of trees they had back then. Most of the time in the Roman age, different trees, they were also connected with religion. And we know that the pomegranate was connected with the goddess Venus, Venere, and Pompeii when began a Roman colony in the 81 before Christ, was called the Colonia Venaria Pompeiana. So basically it was a colony dedicated to the goddess Venus. And there was a beautiful, beautiful temple placed behind the forum overlooking the sea. So now we are going to walk from the garden of Julia Felix inside the great peristylium, a unique example of a Roman peristylium, which is a garden with a porticos around, where instead of round columns plastered with beautiful colors, we have real columns made of marble, but with a squared shape. Welcome to the great peristylium of Julia Felix. One of the first examples of hotel and the luxury spa in all over the history. In the middle, we have this great pool that was used most as a decoration, usually supposed to have statues on both corners when you see the niches, and exotic fishes inside. The bathhouse was just behind over there and had also a private access to the main streets, while the real house with a kitchen and a different atrium and rooms was behind this other corner. The entire porticos is completely covered with a great and beautiful, beautiful frescoes. That is the small atrium where business of the house took place. Behind that small room, we have the arch of a kitchen, and also the servant quarters placed behind there. The great decorations of the frescoes are still very, very intact and preserved in this part of the city. The restoration of the Pride of Julia Felix ended in 2016, where the conservation project could give us basically the beauty of this villa, that we know that after the 62, after the earthquake, that was a sign of an eruption, but people could not read actually that something was coming. The owner of the house, she wanted to have in this part of her garden a beautiful summer triclinium, a summer spot where with a real mattress people could lay down on a side, and recreating waterfalls with a pipe coming through that stairs. The water could reach the middle of this pool and then going straight in the middle of the real one, placed in the middle of the garden, with a beautiful interaction with the architecture, nature, and the statues that they were placed behind the niche, covered with the real volcanic rocks. So it's one of the largest house, one of the greatest peristelium, and the rainwater was collected from the top of the roof that has been restored inside the niche, and that water then reused to fill the pool, or reused for the bathhouse placed to the left side of this incredible house. Salve. Inside the walls, on the side of the porticos, we have some empty niches where the owner of the house used to put some house god sculptures. Could be Venice, but could be also, most of the time, especially after the 62, a lot of Isis, the Egyptian goddess. Pompeii is one of the first city in the southern Italy to have an Isis temple, so important that when Mozart came to visit Pompeii with his father, he was inspired to compose the magic flute here at Pompeii. And the first show that he had in Vienna had a scenography behind himself, the Isis temple of Pompeii. And welcome now to the main streets, Via dell'Abbondanza. So this is the main horizontal road placed east-west, actually. And this road is leading us straight to the Forum of Pompeii. So to my right side, all of this portion of the city is completely buried, is still buried. We are still waiting for the excavations to decide. When I told you 1/4 of Pompeii still left, I mean something like this. The walls that you can see in between the pillars, they are modern walls, able to protect us from the ash that can fall down. While the left corner of the city, it's already all excavated. And in the middle of the road, we have the famous fountains in Pompeii. We have, at the moment, 37 public fountains. The water could reach each public fountain thanks to the aqueduct that was built at the time of the Emperor Augustus. And I will tell you something that it's quite sad. Pompeii has been destroyed 3 times since was when the life of the city was still alive, actually. In the 79 AD, during the eruption. In the early excavations, when people were taking out material from this place, filling museums anywhere else in the world, and in the 1943, when the Allies bombed Pompeii. More than 150 bombs dropped to these archaeological sites, most of them around the amphitheater. And when we do new excavations, make sure, and we found still bombs not exploded, we need to call the Carabinieri, helping us to deactivate them. And where I'm standing now, it's in front of one of the most beautiful houses of the city, closed for the COVID restrictions, as I was telling you before. It's called the House of Venus in the Seashell, Casa della Venere in Conchiglia, where behind the peristelium, we have a great frescoes, as you can see in the picture, of Venus coming, born in a seashell, as the Greek mythology is still telling us. And on the side of the entrance of the Venus in the Seashell's house, we have the great cast of a door, still on the spot. This is the cast of a real Roman door, placed here. The door was closed because it was supposed to be a shop. At the time of the eruption in the early morning, the shop was closed. That's why the door is still here. And the next important house where we are going now, it's called Casa di Octavio Quartio. Actually, In this portion of the city, there were big homes, because there were a lot of space where people could reuse for huge gardens, creating beautiful channels filled with water. And even for this other house, we have the great plaster cast of a door to this site, with the seal of the noble family who used to live here. But one of the greatest cast for a house and for a door of a house here in Pompeii is the Casa di Octavio Quartio, that you can see actually here. People are sitting now on the benches that in the Roman time they were used for clientes, the famous people that they were in charge with the owner, so they had a debit with him. They have to wait outside. When the owner wanted to let them the chance to go inside, they could wait inside the atrium. And please stay with us. We have quite few people standing here because it started to rain. This morning there was no rain in our forecast channel, but it's everything live. So this is the atrium of the house of Octavio Quartio, where the impluvium right in the middle, that actually was used for the collection of rainwater. And the rainwater, thanks to a pipe, was going to the underground cistern, was in connection with a roof placed above. The roof had a hole called compluvium, and when it was raining like today, actually, the water was collected there and then used for different services. On a side of the atrium, we have beautiful cubicles still painted with the original frescoes with the so-called Fourth Roman style. The great yellow color with the girland of flowers, or the panel mixed with this red, the cinnabar, or this black frame at the bottom, recreating a natural garden. But the most beautiful part of this house is behind the atrium, where the owner, that he was a priest for Isis, he wanted to recreate in his own house the Euripeo. As you can see in the slide, the house was split with one portion used for accommodation for private rooms, and the biggest part of the house, that was large, like 800 square meters, a big and huge garden with a great pool right in the middle, with a patio covering with the vineyards. We go inside now, and we can show you. Literally to the right side, when you can see in the slide, there is a closed area because of the light and the restriction. We are not able to go to that side, but as you can see, the beautiful walls painted with this cream color, they were representing all Isis priests, so people with a white clothes with a bold hand, and some decorations recalling the Egyptian style. While inside the porticos where we are, we have a great and beautiful room called Ecus, that now Estelle is giving us the chance to see live this wonderful room. Just 1 second. Okay, yes. That is the great Ecus, the room where we have at the bottom there the fake marble decoration, and above this fake marble decoration that was very often used instead to buy real marble coming from, let's say, Egypt, Tunisia, or other areas around the Italian peninsula, we have a beautiful frame representing the war of Troy, and in particular, right in the middle, the scene of Hercules fighting in the war of Troy. So all the time, people wanted to represent the Egyptian style meets all the Greek culture. Why this pact? Because comparing our modern life, where people might show off their richness with the material things, in the Roman time, the ancient families, they wanted to show off their richness with the culture, and then sometimes representing on the walls of their most important rooms scenes from the Greek mythology. Above the ceiling, we can have the reconstruction of the roof, where we can have a double ceiling used for the insulation of air. And most of the time, even the ceiling was all painted with a beautiful and strong fresco. So Romans, they knew that their life or their bodies, they were in contact with the colors that could change literally their own day. And behind the Ecus that was used as a private saloon overlooking the great garden, as Alessandra is showing us now, we have a lot of beautiful marble statues, some of them representing women, some other representing Egyptian gods, like ibis or bes or exotic animals. Imagine then when the owner was right in the middle of this room, sitting on his maybe a bed, drinking a glass of spiced wine, he could just literally look the beautiful Euripeo that you can see there. That was a kind of, it is an artificial channel that wanted to recreate the River Nile. And then this beautiful temple right in the middle was surrounded by great and beautiful statues. Some of the replica of the marble sculptures are here. The original are stored at the Archaeological Museum of Naples. We can have here a lion hunting a gazelle, or we have the famous Sphinx in this other corner. The Sphinx, so great. Imagine that most of the homes in Roman time, they were used like a kind of museum. So people were just collecting great sculptures or beautiful frescoes. And we know for this house, even the name of the painter, because he left the signature on one of the beautiful frescoes, and his name was Lucius. In this other corner, we have a baby holding, killing a snake, and that is a baby Hercules. So great. While to this other summer biclinio, triclinium family means 3 beds, biclinio means 2 beds, and we have 2 side walls used to support mattress. And to the left corner, we have the famous fresco, one of the most beautiful fresco representing Narciso, that is, he was in love for his own shape, and he's looking his face inside the river that you can see painted just below his bench. While in the middle, we have these great mosaics made of pasta vitrea, glass paste, the sculpture of a satyr, and to the right side, the famous frescoes representing Piramo and Tisbe, which is one of the most famous myths told by Ovidio, that we can literally say it's like a kind of ancestors of Romeo and Juliet of Shakespeare. The beautiful cave represented here, it's all original, and the columns are all made of marble, and the beautiful and small capitals are in the so famous Corinthian style. While the blue color painted around the wall, imagine when it was all filled with water, the effect was a light blue river. While here, the material that you can see on the spot, it's called coccio pesto, which is a waterproofing material, because here there were mattresses and most of the time there was a lot of water. Romans could not use a normal type of cement, but a waterproofing material used for the cistern and pools. A beautiful and great frescoes representing hunting. You can see now in a video where we have some gazelle trying to escape from some lions or very aggressive animals. It was very common to have inside a garden around the pool the scenes of hunting. And then now we are going carefully from the step, reaching the garden, the huge garden. The garden was about 600 square meters with these beautiful roses that we have still here. The archaeologists could understand what type of flowers they had, and with this kind of roses, Romans made the perfume, the famous Roman perfume, or with a cinnamon and other type of spices, not just used to spice food and drinks, but also to make the makeup. And we know that at the time of the eruption, Pompeii was under that so-called luxuria Hellenistica, the Hellenistic culture, where people could live here like in a huge villa of the time of Alexander the Great, or in a beautiful house overlooking the port of Alexandria of Egypt. That's why the owner of this house, that maybe was a freed slave, actually had in the middle of this pool, imagine this kind of pyramid with the water games could recreate in 4 sides 4 waterfalls and beautiful sculptures on each place. And right there, another temple decorated with a typical 4th Roman style, where we have still beautiful swans and ibis or griffon painted with a plaster. This is one of my favorite house, not just because of the quality of the frescoes, not just because of the size of the house, but for the connection that the restorations did to recreate the nature that was literally like this and the architecture. Romans were very careful about nature and architecture. That's why most of the homes, they had beautiful and rich gardens behind the peristylium. And on the floor, we have the remain of the hermaphrodite, and a statue representing a woman with man genitals in that corner, the white one, nearby the wall of the house. So as you might see, and as you can remember, even for the Julia Felix house, we had 2 entrances, one from the main street and one from the backyard. Alessandra is giving you another glimpse of this beautiful and great garden, and then we are going out from the backyard, reaching the famous Via del Castriccio, a famous road that is leading us to one of the most tragic places of Pompeii. So let's go out from the house, and I want to show you where is this road. Ciao Mario. And in this place of the city, that is the Via del Castriccio. And in this corner of Pompeii, because we have a lot of homes with a big empty space, empty areas, the archaeologists wanted to replant the same type of grapes the Romans had back then. It was a great thing, because even today, every single year in October, if you're around Pompeii, you can be part of the harvesting, and then you can try the new wine. The brand who is making the wine is called Mastro Berardino, and the name of the wine is called Villa dei Misteri. This is one of the place where the vineyard is. The grapes are the same type of family, the same type of wine, and the technique of growing them is the same of the Roman time. Romans used to grow the vineyards around another tree, and that was called vite maritata, that means married vineyards, when sometimes they had not space for a huge vineyards, they could have their own grapes inside the garden. And leaving this area of the Amphitheater and the Palestra, we literally are inside, again, the city of Pompeii, with a typical road, with the entrance from the Nocera gate, where we were at the beginning of our tour. And in that corner, when you see like a small channel, that was one of the first area that Pompeii was discovered. I was telling you that Pompeii was discovered in the 1748, but it's not really correct. Oh well, in the early 17th century, the famous king's architect Domenico Fontana had to bring water from the river Sarno to other area along the coast. He was building a channel, but he could not complete it because he found the remains of an ancient city. They didn't know that was Pompeii, but in the early 17th century, there was no concept of archaeology. That's why the excavation didn't start in the 17th century, but after 150 years. And that thing was a good thing, because in the 17th century, in the Baroque time, there was the feeling of destroying, changing, or making pastiche, destroying things, recycling them. That's why it was a good thing that Domenico Fontana didn't start the excavations in the 1599, but we started them in the 1748. And now, Estelle, I'm reaching the place that you know very well, the Garden of Fugitives, but you might want to say something about that place.
We're heading with Raffaele to the southern end of the site, where a lot of gardens, orchards, and vineyards were found. So we've already been to the Amphitheater. We've come from and the Palestra. We've come from the house of Octavius Quartio, and we're walking down towards the Garden of the Fugitives now. And it was in this area in 1961, so starting in March and continuing until July, that Amedeo Maiuri found the largest collection of victims that they could cast in one lot. So there were 13 victims in this garden, known as the Garden of the Fugitives. And he published this, this collection of victims in an article in National Geographic in November 1961, very quickly. Very romantic interpretations that he gave. So I'll just quickly give them to you. He thought that he could identify 3 separate families. So we have the first one here. He thought 2 families were tenant farmers and 1 was a merchant. So this is the first tenant farmer family. He thought, first of all, I don't know, I hope you can see my cursor. The person nearest us, he thought was a servant carrying a sack full of provisions. Then 2 little boys, 4 to 5 years of age, and with them the parents. And he said the father supporting the trembling mother. A lot of his interpretations are not based on any evidence at all that I can tell. They're just, they're quite romantic and very emotional. The second family, he said, was a tenant farmer with his wife and malnourished young daughter who the cast didn't work very well for, so the stream wasn't very good. And then finally the family of a merchant, where we have 2 teenage boys who fell, the mother, and I'm using Maiuri's words, weakened by pregnancy, and with her daughter lagging behind, and then leaning on one arm, trying to raise himself from the ground. We have the merchant, and he said the last person in this pageant of misery was in fact the merchant, raising himself from the ground to try and rescue his family, sadly to no avail. And he did document how they made the casts, and there's archival footage and film, but what we found isn't exactly what he said occurred. So just quickly, I'd like to introduce you to my team. We're just getting to the garden now. Raffaele is going down into it. So we did, in 2019, we x-rayed all the casts. That's my colleague with the chain, Stijn Luc from Belgium, digital x-ray engineer, my colleague and co-director to the right in the background, Associate Professor Catherine Welch, and our radiographer, Julia Ridder. And the chains were to keep the public away because we wanted to make sure they weren't irradiated when we did the work. My other colleagues are forensic dentist, Dr. Elaine Middleton, and anatomist and radiologist, Sung Vu, and the woman with the red hair is our liaison person from the Pompeii Archaeological Park, Dr. Valeria Amoretti, who's also the head of the scientific laboratory, and she made sure that all our work went very smoothly. We're doing our project in conjunction with the Pompeii Archaeological Park. And I just wanted to give you a sense of how we work. The case where the casts have been put, so they were found in the garden, and what Maiuri did, he wanted to give the idea of Pompeii as an open-air museum. So he couldn't leave them in the middle of the garden because it was dangerous for the cast. So he replaced them as they were in the order that they were found in a glass case at the end of the site, at the southern end of the site. So just to do the x-rays, my colleague Stijn Luc, you can see here, and his partner, they wore these little shoes with the toes showing so that they didn't damage the casts as they walked between them, because they've been set up on lapilli, and each cast sitting on a material base, and they're still attached to their pyroclastic plinths, and they're very, very delicate. So if you get too close or tread on the material, they could crack. and getting in between the spaces was a hard job. Also, they had to bend a lot of the time because the case wasn't designed for tall people. And Julia, who's actually an equine vet, she was brilliant at holding very uncomfortable positions and holding the X-ray plate very steady while Stain took the X-rays. And Julia's actually an equine vet, and Stain and Julia do a lot of work in veterinary circumstances. This portable digital X-ray equipment was designed for veterinary purposes because horses don't stand still, and if you're not very fast, they'll kick and destroy your equipment and also your soft tissue. So we were working outside each image as it appeared. We could see on the screen, and that was very important because X-rays are only shadows, and we need to get the right angles to make sure that we don't get distortion and we get the best images. Our work was partially funded by a documentary for the National Geographic, which is why there's a camera there. So Raffaele and Alessandra are actually showing us exactly what we can see in the slide. And because there's very strong reflections on the side of the case, I just sort of very quickly go through what we found. The first person that was said to be holding a sack, the alleged servant, was actually, the sack turned out to be just solid plaster. We found nothing inside it, but this person was young, so they were sub-adult, they weren't fully grown up. In fact, they were quite young, so possibly even pre-teenage years or early teenage years, and their bones weren't fully developed at all. And they were wearing sandals with hobnails, which I'll show you in a minute. The next two children, which Mayuri described as boys of 4 and 5, hard to tell the sex without doing DNA analysis. And unfortunately, that's quite destructive. Our project is a non-destructive one. But this little individual was probably between 3.5 and 5 years of age, depending on the sex. So girls develop a bit faster than boys. And what's really interesting about this individual is this little arm here is fake. The original arm is actually by the side. We've got the X-rays. And this was added by the restorers. Now, the people who made these casts were restorers. They restored statues, so they were used to making art, and they improved things at the time they were making them to make a better display for visitors. That doesn't mean they were trying to make fakes, they were just trying to make it a little more interesting, but it certainly makes our job a bit more challenging. This individual was somewhere between 6 and 6.9 years of age, so younger if female, and they had lost one of their front teeth. So they'd shed one of their milk teeth, the front teeth. I mean, everyone's seen little children with front tooth missing. The second front tooth was pretty close to falling out too. So, a young individual with their and with very crowded dentition. So had they been in a modern Western society, they would have almost certainly been taking a trip to the orthodontist. These are the alleged parents. One quite a young adult and the other older with some dreadful dental problems, tooth decay and an abscess. This individual, now when we get to the second tenant farmer's family, the narrative of Mayuri just doesn't work at all. This individual here is described, we're not sure as which individual. He said it was a tenant farmer's wife and his malnourished young daughter. This is a very, very, very young infant. So someone who was between 15 months and 18 months of age, could be possibly as old as a 2-year-old, but probably closer to the 15-month, 18-month age from the teeth developing. And I'm not going to talk about all the individuals, but one of these, so there were the alleged parents of, this child and an adult, and then another individual where the plaster didn't really take completely, which I think is supposed to be the malnourished daughter, then 2 teenage boys. This is one of those, allegedly part of the merchant's family. And this individual was a young individual, definitely sub-adult. And we can see here. And just finally, this is allegedly the mother, already weakened from numerous pregnancies, and allegedly her daughter. And finally, this is supposed to be the merchant. Now, this pose, which Mayuri describes as them trying to lean up on one arm to try and save his family, is something that is discussed greatly in, and I think Raphael is showing it to you, this person now. I might stop sharing so you can actually see this individual here leaning on one arm. And the pose that they're in, where they're frozen in their last position of life, is a phenomenon not well understood called cadaveric spasm, where the individual, usually happens in sudden or violent deaths, and the individual is frozen literally in their last position. It's thought their muscles go into spasm as they die, and it stays like that until rigor mortis ends, and then everything relaxes. This poor person was covered with ash that hardened around them, and we see them as they were at the moment of their death. Now, this person's not super young. They actually have signs of arthritis in the wrist and fairly worn teeth. So I just wanted to give you a little sense of what we're learning from our project and how we're challenging some of the stories that have been told before, often without a great deal of evidence to back them up. So often, in fact, the stories are just based on circumstantial evidence and a very, very large amount of imagination. I'm going to give you back to Raffaele now. So thank you. Oops. Sorry.
Thank you, Estelle. Thank you for this. Actually, as I always say when I do guided tour here in Pompeii, that we don't have to forget that it's not just a beautiful archaeological site, but Pompeii is a tragedy, where people like us, any class, anything that they were doing, basically it's still here, frozen at 79 AD. And we need to deserve respect. That's why most of the new studies are trying to move them in a good place. I mean, because when the tourism changed and people are coming with the phones, with the social media, they are posting a lot of very sad pictures on internet, and that's why they're trying to give them a better place, a better respect for all of the victims of the eruption of 79 AD. So moving from the Garden of Fugitives, I would like to give you first this incredible view of a vineyards, which is so green, so beautiful. The weather is changing a lot. Estelle, is gonna rain maybe soon. So we have been very lucky to do this live on site until the storm is coming. And here we have one of the largest vineyards planted, actually an original site as was in the Roman time. The wine that you are producing, it's called Piedi Rosso, which is a local wine, very famous in the region Campania, and another kind of wine called Aianico, that following the words Aianicums Hellenicos. It was a kind of grape that was imported here to southern Italy when Greeks moved in the 7th century before Christ in the region Campania. I'm going to this garden, reaching the exit, and we will reach now the top of the walls, where we will have a great and stunning view all over the city of Pompeii. In the meantime, I would like to give you another perspective of the city, of the new excavations. In front of you, you have a big building with a brown roof. That is the modern deposits. All the new excavations of Pompeii, all the new artifacts, like ceramics, amphoras, tiles, and things are stored there waiting for the new study, waiting for a classification, and waiting for the study. So underneath there, we have still other things to discover. And the place where we are going now, we have something special to see. Original dolium, original big, huge pots made of clay, used to store wine for the Roman business. Most of the time, the wine was stored here for a couple of years, and that's why it was not so clean, not so good as our modern wine. For that reason, Romans have to mix the wine with the water and making it sweeter with honey or different type of spices. Wherever you work in Pompeii, even if you are coming in the next, hopefully soon, you will find modern wood above the entrance of the homes, because the wood completely gone. And when we dig from the top, we have to refill the ancient wood with a modern one. Otherwise, we cannot make new excavations. Everything will fill down. Back to the road of Castriccio, that is leading to the left to the forum and the theater area. But maybe that will be another path for our audience. And then we are going now to reach the top of the city walls, where you will have this incredible view. This part of Pompeii, as you might say, it's not anymore the original road. The floor, it's all made with a modern cement, because Pompeii is a site open for wheelchairs. It's one of the first archaeological sites in the world. It's a UNESCO site, open to anybody. So here, this path is the path for the wheelchairs that can literally walk through all over the archaeological site. So nobody will miss anything about this place, which is something so great. And has been a big challenge, because working in a so old city, actually, it was not so easy. One of the last thing that we are doing inside Pompeii is the excavations inside the forum, which is the main square. And over there, we realized just a few weeks ago that below the forum of Pompeii, the Roman one, there was another ancient square of the Hellenistic age, around the 5th century before Christ. So even Pompeii in ancient times was a mix of different layers that at the 79 produced this great and important city, but not the biggest of the region Campania. And then all the trees, like the olives that you can see around, the oleander, the bay leaf, they were all different type of plants the Romans had back then. And now we are going to climb up to this hill that is all volcanic ash to reach the terrace looking Pompeii. And we are nearby the tombs. When we started the necropolis of Porta Nocera, this path is looking above the tombs. And it's not a very common route. Not so many people are coming here along their travel to Pompeii, because most of the touristic area is around the main streets, the abundant street. But to be honest, this corner of the city, it's so peaceful, it's so quiet. And especially if you love archaeology or history, and you want to take with you a book, maybe the Amedeo Maiuri book, House and Inhabitants of Pompeii, that I really suggest you to buy. So if you are wondering what kind of book you can read about this incredible site, Maiuri, House and Inhabitants of Pompeii and Herculaneum. You might stay here reading some of the pages of one of the most important archaeologists to discover Pompeii. And the view of the Vesuvius now is coming in your screen. With the great vineyards that we saw before, the Roman roads, the roofs restored of some houses, and a very big portion of the city under our eyes. So I guess it's a very beautiful view ending our live on-site tour, while to the right side, Alessandra is showing us where we started, from the tombs, where we have the tomb of Vesonio or Eumachia, and still a lot to discover. Imagine digging to the right side, where now Alessandra is going to move with a gimbal. How many new things we are able to discover. So this place, it's not definitely finished, but there is still a lot to uncover.